has crypto sort of changed the cyber threat landscape and the ability for these attackers to extort money anonymously?
Well, I think it's really enabled it. When you look at Bitcoin and how it evolved and how it was being used in the early days, a lot of it was, dark web and back alleys of the internet. Certainly now it's become commonplace for people to have it in their portfolio, but it does allow a level of an anonymous factor that allows people to actually get away with these sort of attacks and not be caught.
So on the other hand, especially in the case of Colonial Pipeline, authorities were able to trace the path of that crypto to get that money returned. So I wonder, could crypto, and this being the modus operandi, also be a way to bring more of these folks to justice?
Well, perhaps, but there's some really interesting services out there. One of them is a mixing service. There's multiple ones that actually allow the crypto to be washed together with other crypto to make it even harder. So in some cases, you can track this down. In other cases, the bad guys have found very creative ways to be able to essentially wash and launder crypto so that it becomes even more anonymous. And I don't think just by outlawing crypto or clamping down on crypto is the single answer, because the bad guys are always going to find some way to get paid. But certainly knowing your customer when you're dealing with crypto can be helpful in trying to at least understand the trail of where that money is going.
Now, earlier this week, I spoke to Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, and he described cyber attacks, the cyber threat landscape, as a new pandemic. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Somebody described this to me, like, while we have a pandemic, we have another real pandemic, which is a cyber. And that's going to be there with us. But at the same time, I think what is really now much more, I think, in the consciousness of people is the level of attacks for sure have increased, but the need for our response to be top-notch has also increased.
Would you echo that description, the threat landscape as a new pandemic?
It certainly has become a pandemic. And over the last 4 or 5 years, it's gotten worse and worse, both in the nation state level as well as cybercrime. And what we've seen is the cyber criminals actually take a lot of the techniques from the nation state actors and actually apply that to cybercrime. And you have to look at it from the perspective of these threat actors, which is what Crowdstrike does. The nation state actors are focused on getting in, staying in, and basically being very silent. They don't want to get caught. From an e-crime actor, just by their very nature, if they're encrypting all of this data, they have to expose themselves, right? So we're seeing a lot more of it because of the e-crime element. But at the end of the day, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. At Crowdstrike, we're dealing with much more than what you see in the headlines. And we've seen the ransomware and big game hunting dramatically escalate over the last 2 years. That's instead of one-off encryption of machines, it's get into a company, look like a nation state, encrypt all their machines, and then ask for massive ransoms.
Now, let's talk also about the identity protection piece here, because, we talk so much about the malware, the damage that's done, but there's so much. The extent of that damage is huge, and identities are at risk. Talk to us about the threat there and how CrowdStrike helps to combat that.
Well, yeah, and it really comes down to zero trust. And when we think about these attacks, certainly there's malware that is being used every day. There's, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, probably over 1 million pieces of malware created a day at this point. Obviously, it's problematic, and those are things that we stop automatically with our Falcon technology. But also, zero trust is really important. So is it really George who's logged into her computer? Or is it Emily who's logged in? Where do you want to go on that network? And how can you trust that system? And that's one of the things that we've really pioneered on the endpoint is zero trust, being able to identify using AI, whether that user is in fact, George or Emily, and being able to prevent these lateral movements, which we've seen in every attack. And when we think about going to the cloud, we saw this with the sunburst activity and the hacks, is the directory services are vulnerable both on premise and in the cloud. and we've seen a lot of attacks in those areas as well. So something that has to be locked down, and we're happy that we're pioneering the charge there.
Now, something else interesting happened this week in that REvil, which is the cybercrime group that we believe was behind the JBS hack. Russia-based group, or a group with ties to Russia, seems to have disappeared. This, of course, after President Biden's sit down with President Putin. Now, President Putin doesn't exactly do everything that the U.S. wants him to. What do you think actually happened in this case?
Well, as a couple of scenarios, really, maybe they were taken out offensively by the U.S. government. Don't know. That hasn't been announced. Maybe they were asked by the Russian government, asked, I say in quotes, to stop their services. Or many times they just shut things down and reconstitute themselves because essentially the heat is on. And if we think about a lot of e-crime, just think about the physical world. You have a lot of businesses that are criminal in nature. They just shut down, bankrupt themselves, and move on and just reconstitute themselves with a new name. And this group actually was a group that did that. They shut down a couple of years ago in their old name, and they reconstituted themselves as REvil. So it's quite likely they will come back. And even if they don't, there will be many other e-crime actors to take their place.
Now, when you look at the second half of the year, what are the key trends do you expect to see? Will we see as many ransomware attacks as we saw in the first half, or more?
I think more. We see 200, 300,000 new samples of ransomware literally every month. And these are very targeted in nature in many cases. And, there's ransomware as a service, which basically, if you're an e-crime actor, you may not even have the skills to create this ransomware. You can just buy it as a service. And in the case with REvil, you would actually pay them a cut. So given the business models, given how low probability is to actually get caught, it really is a big business with a lot of return. And we have not seen it subside. We've only seen it increase, which is why it's so important to protect those endpoints and workloads in the cloud.
Okay, so just to clarify, I was told it was REvil. Is it REvil or is it REvil?
Well, you can say it either way. We have to ask those guys. But if you look at the R is the ransomware, ransomware evil. So you can call it REvil, ransomware. I think what I call it is really nasty stuff by some bad people. And, we're focused on helping customers protect against it, which we've done.